Welcome to Incessantly Seeking, where we discuss the pursuits that drive our lives with a new guest every Friday. I'm your host, Luciana Fauhaber, and today we're discussing the pursuit of community. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Incessantly Seeking. Today we're here with Kara Wang, an actress, activist, supporter of women. Love to have you here today. Thanks for joining us. And we're going to be discussing the pursuit of community, how important it is to have that support. Now, Kara, you're an actress. You grew up in California, even though you're not from here. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Great. Yeah. Hi, Luciana. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. So I actually grew up in the San Gabriel Valley, which is it's technically part of LA County, but it's a suburb basically more east from here. And we usually call it like the real Chinatown of LA because that's where all the Asian people are. Like where I grew up, I think my high school was 60 or 70% Asian. So there's like a very strong sense of the Asian community from where I am from, even though it's technically, LA County. It's about like 40 minutes drive east from here. So yeah, I was born and raised there. I did spend some time abroad as an actress. I went to UC Irvine for my degree and then ended up going to Hong Kong and Beijing to pursue acting for about 5 years after I graduated.
Which is a fascinating story. When we first met, Kara told me how you were like, it's almost like the old style Hollywood film studios where they put actors into like a hold and you have to do their projects for a few years. So I love that has a whole sense of old Hollywood, that we don't see anymore. Actors now get it's job by job and you can be doing a million jobs just to like stay afloat and pay the bills. But there was the golden time of Hollywood when an actor would be on hold with a studio and just get to do their projects for 5 years or how long their contract lasts for. So
Totally.
I love hearing that story. So do you think that this support of the Asian American girl community comes from your upbringing?
So I think, it's been interesting because I do feel like I've had the luxury of experiencing so many different phases of the Asian community coming together. So I booked or not booked, but yeah, booked, I guess, got my first agent when I was in high school, when I was around 15. And even though I went to a middle school and high school that was predominantly Asian, and I grew up in this area that was predominantly Asian, I actually didn't have that many Asian friends, only because I was involved in choir and theater and like the performing arts. And we didn't have that many Asians in the performing arts. Like, honestly, I was like always one of a couple, even though the school in itself was predominantly Asian. Um, and I remember when I got my first agent when I was 15 and I started going out for auditions and stuff like that. Um, it was difficult because I felt like we were going out for these roles that were very two-dimensional. They're only co-stars, one line here, one line there. As an Asian actress, the tropes that I face are very different than the ones you face as a Latinx woman. But, it's like we're the best friend, we're nerdy, or we're like the sexy assassin, or we don't speak English whatsoever. Like all of the different types of stereotypes, that as Asian women were put under. So that was actually one of the reasons why I ended up deciding to go to Asia after I graduated, because I wanted to be like, well, I would actually like an opportunity to audition for the lead or for the villain or for the supporting or for the co-star or whatever, because there should be more opportunities over there. And I actually felt like when I first started, there wasn't that strong of a sense of a community. And this is something that me and a lot of my friends, like you were saying, I have so many specifically Asian American female girlfriends in the industry now, but I didn't have that before. And I think one of the things about that is that we have to unlearn scarcity. It felt so scarce back then. It felt so precious, and I'm sure you can definitely relate to this as well, where it's just like, oh, every show, if there's one Asian, they're not going to cast another one. Like, there's no way. So things felt so precious. And that type of, I think, mentality and idea, we need to unlearn it because it is slowly changing. And we as a community need to unlearn it because it just felt so precious. So it felt like it was hard to become friends with people in your category because you're like, well, there's like the one role and we're all going for it. So, we're direct competition and it's hard to feel like there was a safe space for us to support each other. Now coming back, so I got back about 5 years ago, and I do feel like there has been some change in the industry. And I'm once again going to speak specifically for Asian American women, even though I think a lot of it applies to just women of color in general. But that, the industry has been changing a lot, but we still have a long way to go. And I do think that movies like Crazy Rich Asians, for sure, which everybody talks about a lot. It came out a couple of years ago and it made such a big splash because it was one of our first major blockbuster theatrical releases since Joy Luck Club, which was 10 years ago, with a full Asian cast. It's been 10 years since we've gotten that. And it was a smash hit and success in the States. And I think that propelled this sense of community. Actually, I felt it a very, very direct shift after that movie came out, about how look at all of the faces on screen, and they all look like us, and we can all be in the same film together and have it be a success, make money, show white Hollywood, for lack of a better word, that we can make money, and like keep pushing these types of projects forward. And I think that's where the sense of community really arose in the Asian American community here in the film industry.
And I loved you said that, because when I remember Crazy Rich Asians coming out on the movie theater, I have writer friends in Hollywood who are writing on shows, writing their own shows, leading female initiatives, and they were doing theater buyouts. They were
Mhm.
buying entire theaters just to support the film. And I remember saying on their Facebook, Instagram, if you can't buy a ticket, I'll be happy to pay for your ticket. Come see this movie. And, like I mentioned to you briefly in passing before, it's like, I wish we had something like that for the Latin American community.
Mhm.
I find that in the Latin American community, my experience has been, oh, we can't be friends, or we can't support each other because, oh, you're Brazilian and you're Dominican and you're Cuban and and so we're all so different. And my rhetoric has always been, but we're all Latin Americans. We're all here
Mhm.
for the American dream. We're all here to like try to overcome and help our families and come out of everything that we've come from, be it poverty, be it abuse, be whatever, be trauma in any way. So I've seen you and your Instagram and your support with your female Asian American friends, and I love that. For those of you who don't follow Kara, by the end of this episode, I recommend you do. But I see her consistently posting about the successes of her friends and her other women and Asian American women, and I love that. And I don't see that in the Latin American
Mhm.
community. I see it maybe in small groups of people who consistently hire each other and support each other, but there is not this sense of community, this sense of we are in this together. And like you said, this mentality of scarcity is so important to overcome. I think not only in the job, but in this job market, but also in how we're raised. I grew up in a very modest family. At some point we didn't have food, and that mentality of scarcity stays with you, over time. So it's really overcoming that sense of, okay, I went through that, but that's not my reality today. We have to leave that behind. And I think that's the same thing for the work in the industry. So I really love that you brought that up.
Yeah.
Now, how was that moment when you saw this group of Asian American girl club or Asian American women supporting each other? Crazy Rich Asians happened. You saw a shift in the community. Then what happened next?
I think so. Basically, I think what happened is that movie came out, and you had mentioned earlier about like the theater buyouts and stuff, and a lot of organizations started popping up that were really trying to push the AAPI representation to the forefront. And one of the big ones in our community, they're called Gold House, and that was literally their goal at the beginning. It's called Gold House, and the whole idea is to make sure that AAPI led films make money, because money speaks, in the industry. And so they buy out theaters for every single well, not every single, but as many as, AAPI films that come out as possible, to show, that we can make money. And I do feel like we're so on the cusp sometimes, because I think for all filmmakers of color, or stories that revolve around marginalized communities, we unfortunately have yet to be given the luxury to fail. Like when there is a film about a minority group, it better succeed, because if it doesn't, it's held against us. So it's like when Crazy Rich Asians was such a hit, it was awesome, it was great. These movies like Shang-Chi that's coming out, our first Asian American Marvel superhero, all of these things, we know there's still that pressure of like, it has to succeed. It needs to succeed. It has to make money because we unfortunately haven't been given the luxury to fail. Even though, let's be real, there's so many, for lack of a better word, television shows or films with very, I think repetitive American Caucasian stories, for lack of a better word. Not that they're not important, but sometimes they're repetitive, but they fail all the time. And they get other shows greenlit again the very next year, or another movie that's made in the very next year. Like, they have been given the luxury to fail. Um, so I think it's really, hopefully, I'm very hopeful that we can get there sooner rather than later, and be able to not have that sort of subconscious pressure in a way of like being like, okay, we just have to make sure it does well, even though, we're going to hope it does well regardless. Um, but after that shift happened, I think just a lot of people came to the same sort of epiphany and clarity about the unlearning scarcity thing and about the fact that there is room at the table for all of us. And sort of like you were saying, yeah, there's so many different types of Asians, obviously Korean, Japanese, we're not talking South Asian, Southeast Asian, and we're all so, so different. But it's sort of like what you were saying. We are at the end of the day Asian American, and we do identify by that hyphenate, and we should come together and support each other. And it was after that that I really do feel like so many events, everybody just started coming together, for like media events or premieres or whatever it may be. And it was very much about meeting people and, establishing those connections and going out to lunch and going out to coffee and hearing about their experience. And rather than seeing somebody as your competition, seeing somebody as a collaborator and feeling like it's okay. If I don't get cast and she gets cast, it's a win. It's a win for me. It's a win for the community. I would rather one of you get cast, than somebody else. And you had mentioned a couple times Asian American Girl Club, which is what I am wearing right now. It was started by a really good friend of mine. Her name is Ali Maki, and she's also an Asian American actress as well. And when she talks about why she started this organization, it's just a lifestyle and apparel company that looks to redefine the modern Asian American woman. She talks about how she had no Asian American friends growing up. She grew up in a very white town, and she like wanted to be white when she was growing up because that's sort of all she knew. And she wanted to establish this organization to sort of put sisterhood in the forefront. And I think she's done an exceptional job. And it is really cool to basically like go through life with people who know exactly what you go through, because not only are we all actresses, like we talk a lot about our acting sort of world and our experiences, and we have so many things in common, let alone finding a group of women who not only identify culturally the way I do, but also have faced the same obstacles. We've all auditioned for the same stereotypes, you know what I'm saying? So we all know, and we've all been given the same no's in a lot of ways. So I think it's really powerful.
I remember when I first moved to Hollywood, and I would audition for mostly parts that said ethnically ambiguous.
Mm,
So it would be me and another like Latin American girl. It would be two Asian girls, two African American girls, and like the
yeah.
occasional redhead. Like that's diversity, and it
Yeah.
was really interesting to see that. And it was every time. And there was, somebody in the room. There was always her and I for like a few months, and then it was like the other people that you see, oh yeah, there you are again. And it's interesting to see that it did evolve into a sense that now I think stories are still written specifically for our tropes of like, the issues of our communities or whatnot. Like I said, I still go primarily for like, baby mama or, luckily the drug dealer roles are starting to get scarce, thank God, or
Mhm.
drug dealer's wife or like something like that, and I always used to joke, like I would always audition for the nurse, but never the doctor. Doctors were
Mhm.
never Latina. They're usually either Asian or white. And Grey's Anatomy came around and changed that for everybody.
Yeah.
So that was again something that is interesting. But my curiosity about the Asian American community is, in a film like Crazy Rich Asians, which we brought that up, was there any kind of representation animosity in the sense of like, oh, this is she's Chinese and she's Korean, this shouldn't be on this place, and but she's Taiwanese, or was there anything like that, or is just we're all Asians and it's Asian representation and we're just in this together?
I think that there was some of that. I think at the end of the day, you just can't win them all. You know what I'm saying? It's like my sort of outlook on it, my personal outlook is I tend to go towards the latter because I just feel like we should all be in this together and it is Asian representation and let's just like applaud the success of the film and ride that momentum and create more stories, you know. I will say, you know, what you brought up with that type of, you know, casting, I guess, animosity, which we saw it in just even in the Heights recently, right? About
Right.
that type of representation and what was not represented, what people felt like was not accurate, and et cetera, et cetera. We definitely do see that a lot in the Asian American community, I would say. Um, and I think it's one of those things that we're all just trying to calibrate right now. Like even among my group of girlfriends, I have had girlfriends who have gotten scripts that were written for Chinese American roles specifically. And she might be Korean American or Japanese American or Filipino American. And they've called me and we've had conversations about this. She was like, do you, as a Chinese American woman, feel like if I took this role or booked this role, like how would you feel a certain way about it? You know, and et cetera. And it's interesting because I do feel like it's very subjective. Like for example, Mulan. If they had cast somebody who wasn't Chinese for the role of Mulan, I think I would have had an opinion about it. At the end of the day, I would still support it till I die for sure because we just want it to make a lot of money and I hope it, you know, would be a successful film regardless. But I think it's because it's such a historical legendary character in Chinese culture that I would have hoped that they would have gone out to Chinese actresses first. But on the other hand, I feel like there's been a lot of scripts where I feel like the cultural identity is not the driving force behind the character. And if the character is just happens to be labeled Chinese American, but really their experience is that they're going through an Asian American story, like being Asian in America, like what is the story about? To me, I don't think it matters at all. And if I was on the other end, I would be really disappointed if I didn't get an opportunity to audition for a role just because it was characterized as Japanese American. If it doesn't require any Japanese spoken, like if it's not like a historical or very vital to the story, you know, that that cultural identity is present, I don't think it should matter that much. And so for Crazy Rich Asians, you know, obviously it was written as a book first, and it's about specifically, you know, these Asians who have congregated in Singapore, which comes with a lot of historical context as well, because, you know, there were Chinese that went to Singapore, you know, Malaysian, Hong Kong, everywhere. And yeah, like there were a couple of actresses in there that were Japanese American or whatever, Korean American, whatever it may be. And I think, you know, they tried to do the best they could by making sure that at least for the leads, they cast Chinese American, which they did. And for some of the supporting roles, they didn't necessarily. But see, for me, I think it was that was like the best they could do. I think it's great. Like if you're really just gonna, none of these roles require Chinese even being spoken, basically. Like just a little, you know, with Michelle Yeoh and just a little. But the point of the story is not about their Chinese heritage, in my opinion. You know, the point of Crazy Rich Asians is to show the modern Asian, to show the rest of the world what modern Asia is like, you know. And modern Asia is full of a mishmash of different Asians who all, most of them are, especially of that tier, of that very rich, wealthy, affluent tier. They all study abroad. They all speak English. They all, you know, have, you know, gotten their education elsewhere. So to me, it was fine. But I will, to answer your question in a very long winded way, I do think that there are people who, you know, are not as happy with that type of casting choice when it comes to all the different films. But at the end of the day, I really think it's like, I mean, it's just interesting. Sometimes it doesn't matter at all. You know, like look at Emily in Paris. I don't know if you watched that, but Ashley Park, who's the Asian female in that the series regular, she's Korean American and she plays a Chinese American. But like, I don't feel like I heard any crazy like backlash about it because at the end of the day, it's not about her being Chinese in Paris. It's about two single young women in Paris like living their youth. You know, it has nothing to do with her Chinese heritage. So
I'm glad you brought up In the Heights, because that was something that really blew my mind. I
Mhm.
remember seeing In the Heights on Broadway in 2010 when he first came out. And then I remember just watching it and thinking, oh my God, there's a theater full of brown people on stage. It was the first time ever that I saw people who looked like me really in charge of the narrative. It was about people of color, about their experiences. And I was mesmerized by that. And then later on, I saw it again because I had a friend who was Mexican American who got cast in the show. And, it was amazing a few years later to go watch him. And then I went to see the film. And again, I'm like, here is a movie. And, with John Chu, I guess the intention was to make this the Latinx Crazy Rich Asians.
Right.
And watching that film, I'm like, here's a film of all shades of brown, and now we're arguing that some of us are not brown enough. And I remember seeing people on Facebook who were championing the movie when it first came out. And
Yeah.
then when the criticism came out about that, then they were like, falling hard on, oh, yeah, it's not enough. And I'm like, bitch, I just saw you like 2 minutes ago say how great the movie was. And now you're like, oh, yeah, but that one thing. And that to me was so disappointing and heartbreaking because, again, I'm sitting there and watching. Don't get me wrong, the movie has issues, like any movie could have
Yes.
been done other things. But I think it accomplished the diversity quest of having hundreds of brown, different shades of brown, different types of hair, different types of height, different places where you come from. I mean, come on, people. It really accomplished that. And I'm still in shock of this rhetoric that, oh, but the lead wasn't Dominican, she was Mexican, and the other guy was this. And what about the Afro Latino experience? And I'm like, some of us were darker than the other of us, like, but we're still all brown.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that I think was so overlooked, regardless of what the argument was at the end of the day. And that's why I really proposed that question. And I'm glad you brought that up because I'm still in shock.
Yeah.
It's like, look at the screen. When have you seen that before? Never has there been a movie where there's a bunch of literally brown people dancing,
Yeah.
you know? And I mean, the dancing is amazing. You know what I mean? Like, oh my God, like the little boy in the bodega, like stole
Oh,
the film.
so cute.
I could not stop watching him. He was so good.
Yeah.
And like the abuelita character, like some of the
Oh,
characters,
she
you
just
know,
all the things.
stole the film. And anyways, at the end of the day, I think it's like you said, I'm in the same school of thought as you that it's a win for all of us.
Yeah.
And maybe instead of having Lin Manuel make an apology, like that was also blew my mind. I'm like, sure, I get it. We can always do better. But god damn it, look how much you've done for the community. So,
No.
anyways, and I felt like that kind of was pressured by this
Yeah.
whole media,
Yeah. I hear you.
thing.
I feel like, it's just hard because all of us are working to, put marginalized communities like at the forefront. All of us, like it's and like you're saying, Lin Manuel and John Chu, all of them it's obviously one of their platforms to put POC, at the forefront. And I guess that kind of goes back to what I was saying of like I will support all of the AAPI things forever, forever, and always because I do feel like there's no luxury yet of just like nitpicking at these things. But
Mhm.
I guess, it's also hard because you don't want people to feel unseen. And that's what I feel like some of these communities were saying they felt unseen, even though, I mean, it's just like, man, you just can't win them all.
Exactly. I would say
You
for
don't want people
sure.
to feel unseen, and I'm not trying to like devalue their opinions or feelings about it, but I agree with what you're saying too, where it's just like it's a win for the community, man. I would love to just get to a point where we can, where there are movies out there being specifically made about the Afro Latino experience in New York. Great. I would love to watch it. I would love to see it, but you said we're not at a place where it's just we are just this is the Asian American community, this is the Latinx community. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so I think the best thing to do, like you were saying too, is to push that forward because that's what we have now. So we should just support and push that forward as much as possible. So we have the choice to do these very, very specific stories. You know what I'm saying?
And I completely understand too that as people who have felt unseen, that
Yeah.
some parts of the community didn't feel represented, and that's completely fair and that's completely valid. But at the same time, I think we're missing the big picture. And I think if 2020 taught us anything was that there is a big picture. So now transitioning to 2020, and you started this American Girl support consistent community group, and then we couldn't see people anymore. Do you think that that period of distancing made you guys closer, made you value that community more? Or do you think that it was a period where you really just took some space and some time to like look within, and see, where you're going?
Oh, I definitely think it brought us closer. So when it comes to AAGC specifically, like I said, it was started by Ali, and it's not just actresses. It is open to everybody. It has become this like global group, and and it's not even just for Asian American women. It's for all allies. Anybody can be. It's not like a club you join. Like anybody could be in the club. Everybody is involved and allowed to be in the club. Um, but I will say at the very beginning of quarantine, me personally, I got very, very close to five other Asian American female actresses specifically. And we aren't AAGC by all means. Like, I want to make sure that's clear. We're not AAGC. It's just one of those girls started AAGC. So we try to support her in any way we can. But we actually got close right before quarantine, and we had a bunch of events together and we were hanging out a lot, and then quarantine hit, and we actually had a long-standing Friday happy hour that we were really good about keeping up. Like, we would all sign on, and sometimes somebody had to like run or whatever and sign on and say hi, but we would just like be on Zoom for hours and like talk about all the things. And that was the group of people, because I mean, but my family isn't here, and I don't live with anybody, so we had to like form our own pods. You know what I'm saying? And they were actually one of my pods, and everybody was very, very safe because most of the girls were actually working midway through quarantine. All the production started coming back, so we would test 3 times a week. We would make sure we all tested like a couple times, got negatives, and then we would hang out, and that sort of became my pod. So because everybody was so like COVID aware, especially during that time, because if you're working, you don't want to get a positive.
Oh
But
yeah.
we saw each other a lot, and I actually think that quarantine brought us closer together. And I think we really made it a point to put that friendship um in a very like put a priority to put effort into it. So I think it definitely brought us closer.
And what do you think this community support does when you go out into your life, be it professional or be it
Mhm.
personal?
Oh my gosh, I think it does so much. So events have started to slowly come back, I'm sure, as you know. And I've been to like a couple of premiere screenings. They're always like outdoors, that type of thing. And I just went to the premiere for Never Have I Ever, which is a South Asian show on Netflix. And
Which,
it
by the
was,
way, is so great.
it's so cute. It's so cute.
It's so cute.
Very cute. So season 2 just came out, like and I went to the season 2 premiere, and it was the first event since COVID that I feel like is API forward, and it was like the whole Asian community was there. It was so great to just like see everybody, and it's so cool to like finally meet people in real life, because there's also people that I met during quarantine, doing a bunch of Zoom panels and doing, sort of all those things. And you meet people virtually, but we hadn't had an opportunity to meet yet. And to have these events where they're, AAPI forward and everybody goes, it was so cool to like just like finally meet people in person. And I think the community, knowing that the community is supportive is everything. I have a couple of projects coming out this year, and it means so much to know that I could reach out to these organizations, and I know that they will do what they can to help support and to help push it forward and do what they can, whatever they can to help galvanize.
I love that. So we're wrapping up.
Mhm.
My last question for you is: there is young women of color coming to follow their dreams, whatever it may lead them. What is your advice to them?
My advice for the younger generation, who I have a lot of faith in, by the way, I really do. I always feel like, God, Gen Zers or younger, they just have had access their entire lives. Like if you think about we grew up with no internet, they have grown they've never lived in a world with no internet. And granted, sometimes that's not good, but sometimes I think it's really good, because obviously cyberbullying, all these things that we didn't have to deal with, as much as some of these younger kids are. But they've also been so much more socially aware. This is generations that are growing up with LGBTQ, that are growing up with gender non-binary and trans information and education out there, and BIPOC and all these things that we didn't have, like
Yeah.
we're all learning about that now as adults. Um, and so I feel like for the younger generation coming to Hollywood who want to support their dreams, I would just say, in line with, I guess, what we're talking about, find your people. And maybe that doesn't even necessarily have to do with that come with your cultural background specifically. But if you can find your people and find your chosen family in this city, I think a support system, no matter where that comes from, is really, really important. I think that it does sound so cliche, but you kind of just have to stick with it, you know? Like you have to stick with it, and it's so hard. I always say that we are just professionals at being rejected because that's all we do is get rejected. But if you stick with it, something will stick, and also you will gain clarity as you move through, about what are the types of projects you like to work on. Maybe you are in front of the camera, then you want to go behind the camera. Maybe you want to try start writing. Maybe there's so many things you can do that are adjacent to continue help your passion, but also build on top of your passion as well, you know? So that's what I would say.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Please share where we can find you, follow you, reach out to you, and where we can see you.
Great. Yeah, I'm mostly active on Instagram, and my handle is the real Kara Wang. There's no fake Kara Wang. There's just the real Kara Wang.
Yet.
There's no fake account.
Not yet, but as you get more famous, that will happen. Don't worry.
That's when I know, like, I'll know I've made it. I'm like, oh my God, there's the fake Kara out there. But I'm, posting about most of my projects on there, and I do have a couple things coming out this year that I'm excited for everybody to see. So you can go ahead and give me a follow there.
There you go. Thank you so much for joining us today. And please keep an eye on Kara, and more coming up soon.
Great. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Because everyone's kind of like, I want to be successful. I want to be successful. I want to be successful. It's like you get a job and you're doing this, but then you're like, okay, now I want this or I want that. It's like, well, then what is your definition of success? When is it enough?